There are a few things more deadly to a cowboy than a stampeding herd of cattle or a rattler coiled up in his bedroll. But if he's faced with thousands of angry bees in the hot desert sun, well, that's just downright tragic. And this is the story of one cowboy who learned that lesson the hard way. It was an early spring day back in 1884 when 27-year-old John Wesley Hardin left his ranch near Roswell, New Mexico, and headed into town. The trip was only about 10 miles, and John knew the route like the back of his hand. He had been riding out to visit his sister Elizabeth and her husband Charlie Bassett, 2 of the 9 Hardin siblings his father Titus had made. The mistake of leaving the children behind while he went into town for supplies and a raging bee swarm had promptly made their home in the house, much to the distress of his sister's family. So John was bringing some kerosene to help Charlie clear them out. John took his time on the ride into town, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face and the feel of the wind through his hair. His horse was a good one named Tex, and they got along famously. As he rounded the bend in the low hills, he saw a wide spot in the road and pulled Tex into a lope. It was here where he first saw the dead body lying in the road. He had known Clem Clevenger since he was a boy. They had grown up together in Texas, and then, when Clem was just 19 years old, he enlisted in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. When he returned home, he had been maimed by an explosion and now walked with a limp. He was married to Mary Jane Thompson, another sibling of John's. After the war, Clem had tried his hand at farming and ranching, but it wasn't easy with his health in poor shape. So he worked odd jobs wherever he could find them. John rode up to his friend and stopped, pulling his horse back by the reins. "Well, I never," he said out loud. No one was around. And Clem was lying on his back with his eyes staring sightlessly at the cloudless sky. What was really peculiar about the scene was the swarm of bees that surrounded him. Thousands of them were there, buzzing angrily around the dead man. And John could see the faint outline of the wagon Clem had been driving under the shade of a nearby rock. The team of oxen was still hooked to the wagon, but the driver's seat was empty. John looked around, wondering if anyone was close by, but he didn't see a single soul. He decided he would have to return home and get his brother Charles, or maybe even his father, to come and help. This kind of thing was not for the faint of heart, and he certainly had no intention of getting his hands dirty. Then he turned his horse and started back down the road, slowly putting distance between himself and the buzzing horde. When he looked over his shoulder, he could see the bees following him. They were still angry and wanted something from him, though he wasn't sure what. John urged Tex along, and the horse broke into a gallop. But the bees were keeping up with him. After a while, John realized what was happening. The bees weren't attacking him personally. They were after the dead man's team of oxen. And so long as he had those oxen, they would consider him their enemy. If he released the oxen, they would leave him alone. So John did the logical thing and wheeled his horse around and headed back toward the angry swarm. And when they saw him coming, the bees split apart to let him pass, forming a living wall on either side of the road. He rode right through the center of them and felt the sting of their bites all over his face arms, and hands. And when he reached the wagon, he unhitched the oxen and drove them away. The bees followed him for a little while longer, but eventually gave up and headed back to their hive. Once John had driven the bees away, he came back to the road and climbed onto Clem's wagon. The dead man's body was still there, and the smell of death hung heavy in the air. John had no intention of staying around any longer than he had to, so he jumped down and started walking alongside the wagon. But the ground suddenly gave way under his foot, and he fell into a hole. And when he landed, he knocked his head hard on a rock. When he came to, the world was spinning around him, and his vision was blurry. As he struggled to his feet, he noticed that the bees had found him again. Their anger was renewed, and they began stinging him over and over. He slapped at them blindly, trying to brush them away, but they kept coming. And then he remembered the bottle of kerosene he was carrying. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. John opened the bottle and splashed the liquid on himself. The bees immediately swarmed him, and then they all died. Then John noticed something strange. The dead bees weren't falling to the ground. They were staying stuck to him. And so he realized with growing horror that he was completely covered in dead bees. There must have been hundreds, if not thousands of them stuck to his skin. This wasn't good. John thought back to his trip earlier that day, when he had seen Clem's body lying in the road. The man had been dead for some time, and that meant the bees had been there a while, too. They had built their nest in his clothes, and now, thanks to John's carelessness, he had brought the entire colony back with him. And then his mind went to his family. If he had brought these bees back to the ranch, they would all be killed. So John did the only thing he could think of. He took off his clothes, the ones covered in dead bees, and flung them into the hole he had fallen in. Then he crawled out and ran away as fast as he could. The sun was high in the sky by the time John finally made it back to the ranch. He was dirty and exhausted, and his whole body ached from being stung. He didn't even bother to dismount and just slid off Tex's back and onto the ground. Then he walked toward the house as fast as he could, still expecting the angry bees to attack him at any moment. But they never did. And when he looked back, he saw Tex shaking himself off and trotting back toward the barn. John hadn't brought the entire nest of bees back with him, but he still worried that the ones that had hitched a ride on him might be laying eggs under his skin. He begged his father to take him to the nearest jail so he could lock himself up for the night. But Titus wouldn't hear of it. "You can sleep in your own bed," he told his son. "Just stay away from my house." And so John spent the night in the outhouse, waiting for the pain to go away. In the morning, he was surprised to find that not only were the stings gone, but the bees were, too. He spent the rest of the day washing himself and scrubbing the dead bees off his skin. And by nightfall, he was back to his normal self. It was probably one of the scariest things he had ever experienced, and he wondered how Clem's body had ended up in the road. But the dead man's secret stayed with him until 3 months later. In June of 1884, Mary Jane went into labor, and John was called upon to deliver the baby. She had been complaining of a terrible headache, and when the baby was born, it was clear she wasn't going to make it. Her sister Elizabeth nursed her through the night, but in the morning, Mary Jane was dead. Then the other shoe dropped. John went to tell his father, and he, along with Charles and the rest of the family, left to go to Clem's ranch. They found the dead woman and also discovered the source of her terrible headache. A bullet had entered her temple and exited through her cheekbone. Clem had taken his own life after his oxen had been stolen. When John pieced everything together, he knew why the bees had been guarding the dead man's body. They had kept watch over their master until his family came for him. And they had attacked John because they thought he was trying to steal their master's property. It was a sad end to a troubled life, and John Hardin was glad it wasn't his. Well, you need to hear the true story of terrifying bear attack caught on camera. Well, check out this one instead.